Having some problem with the mute and unmute. I find out that if I have my microphone on, there's echo and whatever. So I'm gonna mute myself in between.
Okay.
Okay. All right. You look all pretty and tan. Florida is good for you.
You know me, I love a cigar and I get tan.
So, Ed, first of all, thank you for being on the call. I appreciate it. Can't wait for today's conversation. So, these guys here in the background and a 3-year-old, um, there are members and coaching clients, a variety of fields and backgrounds, and all eager to learn a little bit about leadership from you. And the way I explained it, you ran, to my knowledge, I'm sure there's been more, 3 of the largest agencies in the country between your position with NYPD, Baltimore Police Department, and Maryland State Police. And if there's anybody that is capable of talking about leadership, is probably you. So I'm going to open it up for you.
All right. Yeah, and I just would like, so he's correct. Those are the 3 positions I had in policing. And also, just so people know, I do have a background in leadership. The University of Virginia, in their MBA school at the Darden Business School, they taught a class for 10 years about me, teaching leadership, turning around a crisis, an organization in crisis, through leadership skills. So I do have some credentials in this. And I think it translates to no matter what field you're in, because I'm in private industry now for the last 20 years. I did 25 in policing and the last 20 in private industry and broadcasting and television and things like that. Leadership matters. It matters. I don't care if you're, in a life and death position like I was, where, a mistake can actually, people die, or, you lose profits and the business collapses, people lose their pensions or whatever it is. Leadership matters. And I think it's either undervalued or people just don't realize not everyone's a leader or can actually lead organizations. You can have the position, but a lot of folks just don't understand how to lead other human beings. And it really is a skill, but it can be learned from other people. And I did a lot of reading. I looked at people I respected, growing up in my organizations, and I discarded the ones who were terrible because I recognized I don't ever want to work for somebody like this again. And if I got in a position, I wouldn't do it. So, and I think the best way to do this is through personal experiences and stories, because I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna talk like I'm reading out of a textbook and tell you what to do in your own businesses, because I don't know what you do for a living. But I do know leadership matters, and I don't care if you're running a small private business or a 41,000 police officer department like I was. It's the same skill, and it matters to the people who work for you and their families and the people you serve. So it just all matters. But I've had bad leaders that I've completely just totally changed my view on leadership and made me realize what I would or wouldn't do. And I've had great people in my life. And I've had some unusual experiences that I think you probably don't know, despite you may have read about me or heard about me. But the stuff that you probably don't know that I've encountered in my life, that is one of them actually impacted world history, big event in U.S. history and world history. So, what do you want to start with?
Well, you can't leave us hanging without a comment. So how about we start there? The event that changed world history. That sounds
Okay.
good point.
All right. And this was an example of me working for a very weak leader, and it bothers me. It bothers me to this day, all these years later. I was in a leadership position. I was a very young detective lieutenant in the NYPD. This happened in 1990. The way it worked out, I'll tell you the story from start to finish. Just on Halloween 1990, I'm running the 7th Detective Squad in New York City. The 7th precinct is in the Lower East Side. Nothing like it is now. No fancy hotels, no good restaurants. It was a terribly violent area. A lot of heroin, a lot of violence, stabbings, shootings, murders. Um, and that night, I got shot at chasing somebody who just shot at someone on Halloween. Um, so we ended up catching him after a brief chase, bring him back. I get a call from the Manhattan Chief of Detectives, who I had done a favor for recently, um, preparing a presentation for him. He said, "Eddie, would you like to run the 17th Detective Squad?" It's like, well, let me think about that. Um, yeah, I'm in the seventh now, which is one of the worst areas of the city at the time. Um, and I can actually go to the 17th, which is the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where it's the richest people in the country live there. Henry Kissinger lived there, Katharine Hepburn. Very little violence. It's a very upscale place and a very sought after position. So sure, of course. So that next week, I ended up showing up there on November 5th of 1990. And what happens is I just go in, my first day in the precinct. Um, I just want to go get my parking permit, meet the detectives, fill out my paperwork, meet everybody, meet the precinct commander, and go home. And I did. I get home and I get a call from the woman I'm replacing. She says, Eddie, you really need to get in here. Um, we've had a shooting. We had a murder. I'm like, oh, really? Unusual, very unusual for that area. And so I go back into work. I drive back from where I lived. I went back into the east side of Manhattan, and I'm asking her on the ride in. I'm like, well, what happened? She said, well, I was in a hotel. I'm like, wow, the hotel, great. Yeah, it was a rabbi. Like, a rabbi? Like, yeah, she was Meyer somebody. I'm like, Meyer Kahani? She's like, yeah, that's him. That's the guy. I'm like, oh, Meyer Kahani, if you don't know, was a member of Israel's Knesset, very, very polarizing figure in, in Israel and the United States. He was the leader of the Jewish Defense League, and someone I was very familiar with, and he was assassinated. He was doing a book signing in Manhattan. A man walked up to the podium to have his book signed. He was wearing a yarmulke, um, trying to fit in with everybody else. And as he went to bring his book up, he pulled out a 357 Magnum and shot Kahani in the neck and killed him. Running out of the room, he shoots another man who tries to stop him. And then he runs onto Lexington Avenue, where it gets interesting, where he actually runs out of the hotel, jumps in a taxi cab, jumps out immediately, which is important, gun still in hand. Um, gets in a gunfight with a uniformed police officer, and they both end up wounded on the street of Manhattan. So now we have a prisoner. I have his wallet, I have his papers, I have whatever he had on him. He has a date book on him with a piece of paper with every elected official in New York State who was Jewish. Obviously, got my attention. I think this is odd. Um, what's this about? So I don't know exactly what I have, but I know it's something. So I have him. He's in the hospital under arrest. I send detectives to his house in New Jersey, who answers the door, but two other Egyptian men who admit to being cab drivers. What happened was the cab he jumped into and jumped out of was moved around the corner by a meter maid. He jumped in the wrong car. It was his getaway car. He gets shot. That's how history changes. Um, we locked them up for murder, because if you and I walk into a Royal Farms and kill somebody, or you kill somebody and I'm driving the car, I'm guilty of murder as well. So I have three people under arrest for murder. Do a search warrant on his home. Come up with I can't tell you how many pages of documents. Um, and we have all this stuff I can't read, and I have three prisoners in custody for a murder of a very prominent, fiery, Israeli American leader. I don't know what I have. I go to brief the chief of detectives in the morning, and all he wants to do is have this go away. And keep in mind, I'm a 30-year-old detective lieutenant. Everyone's much older than me in those positions. He turns to me and says, Eddie, can you tell me this guy acted alone? I'm like, no, of course not. I have three people under arrest. I have all this stuff I can't read. It's in Arabic, but I know it's something because it's bomb making manuals and the reconnaissance photos of New York City landmarks, like the police headquarters, the FBI building, the World Trade Center, the Brooklyn Bridge, all kinds of stuff I can't read. A black and white marbled composition book we had as kids, um, that was actually turned out to be something else. I thought it was an armored car stick up by the diagrams. It turned out it was the plot to kill Hosni Mubarak. I stumbled on this stuff during a murder investigation. So I tell this to the chief of detectives in the NYPD, who was a very well thought of guy, but turned out to be just like a lot of other chiefs in that department at the time. Want everything to go away and just continue to move on with a reputation. He shuts me down. I said, this is big. I don't know what it is, but it's a big deal. He says, Eddie, shut up in those words, it's shut up. You handle murders, they handle conspiracies. Points to the FBI, Joint Terrorism Task Force. It's a combination of New York City detectives and FBI agents. So I turned to my captain. I said, "This is nonsense. This, you know, this isn't true." He said, "You want to tell him again?" I was like, "No." Paramilitary organization. I'm a lieutenant. He's a three-star general. Captain tells me, basically, shut up. The general told me to shut up. I shut up. Turns out they released the two suspects who were driving the cab for whatever reason. Said they didn't have a probable cause to hold them, which was nonsense. Um, the documents were released to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We go to trial. The shooter's convicted of shooting Kahani and killing him. However, I move on to another assignment. I got transferred to another assignment downtown in February of 1993, about two and a half years later. I hear an explosion. I think it's a subway transformer. It's not. It's actually a Trade Center. It was bombed in 1993, if you remember. 6 people dead, 1,000 injured. Who put the van in the Trade Center? The guys who were released from my murder investigation. The documents were never translated. They were translated midway through the bombing trial. It turns out they were actually Al Qaeda members. It said on the documents. What was that? Something happened here. Um, but anyway, if you go to the Trade Center Museum, you'll see this talked about it as you exit. But my point is, the weak leadership I found was the captain who wouldn't stand up for me, the chief who just wanted us to go away, and it soured me for a long time because for obvious reasons. After 9/11, I was distraught. I testified about this in front of Congress. But my point is, I learned not to dismiss people because of their age or just want things to go away because it's convenient. Because what happened is, if we had an arrest for this murder, the case is closed. Now everything's the FBI's responsibility in the chief's eyes. He has nothing to do with it anymore. They have to handle this. He's fine. And it just turned me off in a lot of ways, and I vowed never ever to do it again.
So I've heard this story in the past, and it never ceases to amaze me. How things unfolded. Can you actually pivot off of it a little bit, and you talk about dealing with bad leaders? What are some tips that you have to deal with said bad leaders? So how do you manage that? Because I'm sure everybody here had an experience with a bad leader. I know I had. How do you confront them? How do you still do what's right in a sense? So how do you manage that event?
That's a good question. I've actually learned you have to manage up. Managing down is not that hard. Managing up is hard. And I've had to manage up, and you probably all have in your careers, whatever you do. I've had a couple of examples, some minor, some major. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I'll say you just have to believe in what you're doing. If you believe in what you're doing, have the courage to do it and say it, and it pays off in the end, because if you're honest with yourself and with other people, they'll respect you. The people who you serve under you will respect you, and they'll know you're strong, and they'll follow you no matter what. If you're not, you're going to be a failure. If you stand up for yourself, and I always felt this, no matter what, I'm going to do what I believe is right. I'm not going to take orders from people who I think are ridiculous. If they have to be lawful orders, you can't tell me to do things that are illegal, improper, immoral, unfair. I just won't do it. And I've stood up to people. And simple, I'll give you a simple one that's kind of humorous. When I was deputy commissioner in New York City, I was deputy commissioner operations. I worked for a man called Howard Safer, who I loved. He gave me a tremendous break in life. And I thought he was terrific as a police commissioner. And Howard, um, they were doing a big recruitment drive, and they have all of us, the command staff of the NYPD, which is big. I mean, there's a lot of it's a 50,000 person organization, um, and these guys didn't get to the top by being nice guys. A lot of really savvy, tough men and women who got to the top of that agency. So all sitting around this huge conference table in the commissioner's meeting conference room, and he wants to show us his video of which he's so proud. It was a recruitment video, and he he shows it to us, and he's smiling and tapping his feet. What it was a young woman on video dancing, doing kind of a reverse striptease to Rocksteady. She's dressed, but she's putting on the NYPD uniform to this song as she's dancing and singing and stuff. And the lyrics were changed. And the repeating lyric was, "Get a job in the community." And it was over and over and over. And it was clearly meant for, they were looking for minority recruits and doing this. And this was the video. And he's tapping his feet and smiling. And I look around the room and everyone else is doing the same thing. And he shuts off the video and he turns around to the staff. He says, "So what do you guys think? What do you think?" And they're all, "It was fantastic, Commissioner. How do you do it? That's a winner. Again, how do you do this? It's just another bullseye." He turns to, and I sat right at his right hand, literally. He turns to me, he says, "Eddie, you're unusually silent. You have nothing to say about this?" I said, "Oh, I do." He says, "So, what do you think?" I said, "It sucked." You could hear a pin drop in the room. He said, "Excuse me?" I said, "It sucked." He's like, What do you mean?" I said, "This is not my job. This is a career I worked hard for. Took a test, took a physical, took a medical, a psychological, went through a police academy, risked my life. This is not a job that people take lightly. It's a calling. I could have done anything else. I chose this. You're sending the wrong message." He sits back for a second, and all of a sudden, he goes, "Oh my God, you're right. That's not the message I want to send." What do you think the other guys in the room did? "I was thinking the same exact thing. I thought about that." And they all decide now it's not a good idea. That's what leadership can do. Because when you have a bunch of cowards sitting next to you, if you stand up, somebody will stand behind you because now they have protection and they'll actually stand up and say what they're thinking instead of just going along for what I thought was a disastrous idea. And we never put that video out, it never happened. And some of the other things I would do when I was actually leading police agencies in uniform, Baltimore, the state police of Maryland, I made sure um, I never ever separated myself from the rank and file. I would never ask them to do something I would not do. And I wanted to know that because I read a lot about leadership going through my years and years of promotions. I read things about Napoleon and Lincoln and private business, Welch and Iacocca. And I think one of the guys from Hewlett Packard, he would have a contest every year where they disassemble a device and have a contest with the best employee they had, and he'd always win. And that's what I tried to do. Like, even as police commissioner in Baltimore, I made a point of not wearing the dress uniform on patrol. Wear the uniform of the day. Go on patrol every day. I'd back people up in the roughest parts of Baltimore. I'd get into chases. I'd chase people myself and put over the radio, Unit 1 in pursuit. And to this day, people remember this. And having the state police too. But I was at Pine Ridge Golf Course. And the starter goes, "I remember you. You backed me up in Monroe and Fayette." I go, "What?" "Retired Baltimore police officer. I'll never forget it. I had two guys on the wall, and who pulls up but you?" He said, "I'll never forget. I never saw a police commissioner like that before." And I remember the state police. I was on 95 up at the northern border up by Delaware. One of my best sergeants had a group of drug dealers pulled over. They had a ton of cocaine in the back of the car. Um, so we pull up to back him up, and I get out, and he turns to me, he goes, "Colonel, you're wearing a full gun belt." It's like, "Yeah, I'm working." "Yeah, of course." Turns out my command staff did not wear a gun belt. They would carry their off-duty pistols under their dress uniform jacket, like they're going to protect themselves at the ATM. That's not what it's about. You have to look like you're serious about the job, and you do whatever you ask people to do. That's why I would jump fences, lock people up, chase people. I put myself in the same harm's way I put them in every day. They knew it, and now it's 25 years later. They still appreciate it. I still hear stories. And then there's some political stuff you have to confront. And I don't care if I work for politicians, but you may work for CEOs or business owners. It's still political. And I realized some things that I would not do that I was asked to do. And I'll tell you who did it. It's just um, I had one of the best commanders in Baltimore when we were turning it around. His name was Don Healy. He commanded the Northeast District. and there was a rapist in the district. Someone wrote a memo. He signed. It was improperly worded. Absolutely shouldn't have been signed, but he signed it. There was a rapist around some bus stop up there by a park. It said, "Stop all black men around whatever bus stop it was." And I'm in the cabinet meeting at City Hall, and O'Malley grabs me and says, "What is this about?" I said, "I have no idea." I said, "I'm here with you. I don't know." I said, "I'll find out." Apparently, Larry Young had grabbed it, put it on the radio, and there was a big uproar. By the time I got from City Hall to police headquarters, Don Healy had retired. They got to him, told him he had to retire, forced him out of the job with 29 years. Great commander, big loss for the city, not just me and the department, big loss for the city. And it was awful. It was just awful. And then I got a call, follow-up call. I was furious. I get a call, and there's a hotline from the commissioner to the mayor and back. He calls me. It's from the mayor. Is Eddie, the Black Caucus isn't happy. Can you take his pension? I was like, take his pension? I was like, no. I'll tell you what, I'll do one better, Martin. I'm gonna go down to his house. I'm gonna have sex with his wife and burn his house down. How's that? I hung the phone up. Swear to God, it's in my book. And I wasn't that kind in the words. I'll refrain from the vulgarities I used. That's what I said to him. I would not ever do such a thing. You could fire me for that. I would never do that. And it's just you have to stand up to people. That's what leadership's about. It's not about wearing a suit or wearing a uniform and making money and telling people how you're the boss and they're not. And I've had plenty of those. I'm sure you have, where people remind you every day who's in charge. I had a boss on radio that we have a disagreement. He'd take out his business card and show me that he was the vice president of the company. I'm like, yeah, still wrong. So it just doesn't matter. But yeah, so I mean, I've had plenty of that. There was a point where they tried to get us to, if police got involved in a shooting, got sued, the city would only indemnify the officer up to $200,000, which means, these lawsuits are always ridiculous. So you get involved in a justified shooting, and they say, it's $1 million judgment. You're on the hook for $800,000. Said, I'm not doing that. You're never going to sign this. But you have, my point is you have to stand up to your people, even if they're your boss. You've got to stand firm, fight for what you believe in, and it really does pay off in the end. So it's just a couple of them.
Sorry, managing technology is not my strong suit, as you know.
I'm well
But
aware.
I do, I do want to attest to two stories that I know firsthand of you. First one is I was riding with Donnie Gherkin, which he was the sergeant of the plainclothes narcotics unit at the time, and we are Northeast District. And when a call comes out and you hear Baltimore One responding, and I'm like, what does that mean? And Donnie goes, that means our chief just responded. Like, really? So when you said that you did respond to calls, I was actually witness to one. And the other thing is when I was working for the Police Training Commission, obviously working a lot with state police officers or troopers. They don't like to be called officers. But I asked them what was their opinion of you, because you and I are friends, and I was curious, and they said, well, the easiest way to explain it is the street level officers loved you. The command did not, because exactly what you said, you forced them to actually be cops, right?
Yeah.
They're not just sitting in a desk. So again, just reaffirming what you said. But to that point, so leading the troops, I don't want to say that's easy, but to your point, rank does matter and people do abide for the most part. How do you lead managers, like the middle command people? Because those are always the sticky ones, right? Those are the
Yeah.
ones that think they have just enough power to stand up to you, but they try to throw the weight around, but they're not really there yet. So how do you manage them?
The way I did it was truly with carrot and stick, and actually more carrot than stick for the middle managers. Um, because after a while, it became clear, like I was very clear about what I want to do. This is a serious job. Um, if we make a mistake, I said people die. This is not something to take lightly. And I'm leading a. I used to live in a harbor view when I first moved downtown to Baltimore. And I look out over the city, and I reflect on, I am responsible for this whole place. It's like, wow, it's an awesome responsibility. You really have to take it seriously. So you need good people. So what I would do is I would actually, and I would be in the field every day just to see who was actually doing the work. And you're talking your middle, that's where your middle managers are. In my world, it was police officers, detectives, sergeants, lieutenants. That's where I really wanted to find out who was who, what was what. Um, and you learn a ton. You're not going to learn it sitting behind your desk or staying in your corporate headquarters or your police headquarters. You've got to be out there and talk to people. So what I would do is when I was out riding around, I would actually stop cars and just talk to some people of all ranks and ask them how the department was. What do you think? What would you change? And I'd say, I don't want to just tell me honestly. And one young officer, commissioner, says, "We just want to know what you want. We'll do anything. Just tell us what you want." And I realized communication was really key. You have to communicate what you want to people, because if you don't, they don't know and they get frustrated and they'll just shut down on you. And then I would start finding out who the smart ones were and who the weak ones were, and I would get rid of those guys. And after a short time, people recognize, and they will recognize, because like we've all been in jobs where you're next to somebody who's a slob and a lazy guy and doesn't come to work, calls in sick all the time. When he's there, he's doing something else, and it always pisses you off because you're like, I commit every day, I'm doing my job, I'm doing things right, and I know, and he gets away with murder. I would just make sure they got away with nothing. And the way I did it was I would make their lives miserable, absolutely miserable. If you were, a zero, you had a tough go. If you did your best and your heart was in it, you could not be, you don't have to be that talented. But if you were trying and you really believed in the mission of what you were doing, you had a good life. I promoted people rapidly, even if they were young. Tony, the deputy mayor for public safety now, was a sergeant when I was in the police department. Um, we call each other. I call him. He's like he calls me dad. I call him son. He's like my protege. Um, he was just a young sergeant from Baltimore, inner city guy. Grew up in rough areas in the city, and I saw this guy was a sharp guy, sharp cop, aggressive, smart, tough, didn't take nonsense. Guys respected him. I promoted him up to the ranks as fast as I could, and now he's the deputy mayor of the city, public safety guy, and he remained loyal to me. And I'm not saying it's like, oh, good for you, but it's important because despite all that happened to me, he still to this day defends me blindly. Um, he was at a community meeting a couple of years ago. He told me we still have lunch. He told me the story, um, talking about crime in the city. And this, then my name came up, and somebody said something derogatory. He said, "Let me stop you right there." He said, "You don't know what you're talking about, first of all." He said, "Second of all, you're entitled to your opinion. But all I know is I learned everything I know about crime fighting from that man. And that's like getting your black belt from Bruce Lee. So that's how I feel about him." And the point is, what your question was about managing middle managers and how do you deal with them? I was just did that. I would actually just make their lives better, promote them, show them that they're worth, tell them I value what you do. And I just may be older and have more rank, but I'm not smarter or better. You're a really talented guy, and it's going to pay off for you. And you, who spent your whole life, working in headquarters 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and doing nothing and not putting your life on the line like the rest of the guys, I'm not going to do anything harmful, but you're not going to benefit. And the message gets out. And I think that's what you do. You communicate by your action. And I use the media a lot, honestly. It was not, I was in, people used to tease me. It was on television all the time in the media. It was by design because it's a great way for people, and in whatever way and now you can do it with social media because it's easy. Um, but I would use the media because then the message gets out. You can send your message out instantaneously instead of riding around, in my case, 3,200 officers and telling everybody individually. I remember we had a young officer who made a routine arrest in a house on a warrant. The prisoner wants to be uncuffed. I have to go to, you know how it is when you put handcuffs on somebody. They immediately have to go to the bathroom because they don't want to be cuffed and they think you have to. No, once the cuffs are on, they're on. You do what you got to do. He uncuffed this guy. Guy grabs a knife. Now comes at the officer. Officer return fires at him, kills him. A huge crowd gathers outside the home when they hear what happened. Killed a man. The stories are just, he was unarmed. The cop just murdered. That's not what happened. The guy came at him with a knife in a hallway. Um, so I get there, and the cameras are all on, everybody's watching, and they said, "What are you going to do about this? You going to suspend him? Is he going to be disciplined and fired from the?" I said, "No, absolutely not." I said, "He may be disciplined for uncovering a prisoner." I said, "But if you came at me in a hallway with a knife, I'd kill you too." That's the end of there were no more questions after that because there's nothing else to ask. If you dance around things and you say, well, he could have used verbal judo and tried to do this with the man, and no, you don't. You know how you of all people, you know how deadly edge weapons are within 7 yards. It's worse than having someone with a gun. Someone gets within that range with a knife, you may get killed. There's no because even when you shoot him, they still come. So I said this. I said, no, I'd kill you too. That reverberated through the police department. Well, wow, this guy's got our back. So there, have your employees' backs, and make the zeros uncomfortable. Seriously, promote the brave, promote the hard workers, do whatever you have to promote the people that promote your agenda. But don't just let the other guys get away with everything. I'm not saying you have to be outrageous and punish them, but don't reward them. Don't suffer fools gladly because they'll take advantage of you, and morale will just be terrible, and it just hurts your organization.
Perfect, Lavi. Let me ask you another question since you kind of allude to it now and no concept of culture in the organizations. You work for three different organizations with very different cultures, right? Baltimore Police Department is different than Maryland State Police, which I assume both are different than NYPD,
Right.
right? So, how much do you think is a leader's role to dictate that culture, and how can you affect it to fit your needs? Because obviously, culture will either I don't want to say make or break, but certainly make your life easier or harder as a leader, right? So how do you think that factors in?
Yeah, we can thank. That's a great question. I didn't even think you would ask that, but that's really, really important. I forgot about that. Yeah, one of the things I had to change in Baltimore, particularly, because in New York City, I was not the commissioner. I was a deputy commissioner. I had a lot of power, but I didn't get to change the organization. I just ran the operations. In Baltimore, I had to change a culture that was toxic, um, terrible, toxic, just awful. And I found out in many ways, and I vowed, and I tried. I think I did correct it, and guys talk about it. But I'll give you a good example that you bring it up. It's like I still to this day can't believe this happened, but those guys would actually settle scores with people that offended them years, like 10 years ago in the police academy or in a district, or who was disrespected or whatever you want to say. Um, they would, if they had power over them at one point, now it wasn't just business. Now it was like, oh, I focus all my time on ruining this person. That's how the culture was bizarre. We didn't have that in New York. I'm not saying we're perfect. If you had enemies, if you were out with the people that were in power, you get a rotten assignment, but they would try to destroy you. Here was Baltimore was nuts. They're different, man. That was a crazy department. It really was. What happened was, and this was a huge moment for me. Um, there was a lieutenant, and there was racial implications and vengeance and all kinds of nonsense in this. Um, there was a lieutenant who was actually a good lieutenant, good cop. It really was. He had a take-home department car, which is a big perk. A lot of departments have them. City departments don't because it's just they run 24 hours a day usually, so they're too busy, they're too big. But if you work for the state police or a county somewhere, you get a department car to take home. So no wear and tear on your car, you get no gas to pay for, things like that. He had one, but in the city, you had to drop it at a district in the city limits closest to your house. He lived out in Carroll County. So somehow they get wind that he's taking the car home. And they are my deputy commissioner of operations, my number two guy in the department, and the chief of detectives. What these geniuses decide to do is they get a set of spare keys for that police vehicle. In the middle of the night, they drive to Carroll County. They steal the car from the driveway. They drive it back to Baltimore, abandon it on Northern Falls, call 911. One guy tries to disguise his voice by putting on a stutter. And he gets on the phone with 911. All the calls are recorded, obviously. He's like, police, there's a car on Northern Parkway. It's abandoned, blah, blah, just to get someone to respond. I hear the tape. I'm with Jane Miller at the time, listening to the tape. Both of us recognized the voice. It was our chief of detectives. I was like, oh my goodness. So my opinion, I have no choice. I tell both of them they have to put their papers in and retire. And I brought them in. I said, we have a city where people get murdered about at least once a day. Most violent city in the country. I trust you guys to help me reduce the crime. This is how you spend your time. The reason they did this was they wanted this guy to be fired. He didn't lie. He told the truth. He told me the car was stolen from his driveway. Had he said it was stolen from the precinct or the district, he would have been lying. And if you lie in an investigation, you're actually terminated and you lose your pension. By telling the truth, he lost a couple of vacation days as a penalty. That's it. They were trying to get this man fired. The I think about my experiences there. That's one about a culture that's just crazy, but the city has a crazy culture. So anyway, I forced them to retire. Big public outcry, um, city council hearings and the like. I weathered it. I didn't care because they had to go. That you can't have these men leading your police department. They're gonna think about what they did. Think of what they did. They ignored their duties, stole a car, abandoned it in Baltimore, trying to get another member of the department fired for something really minor. It's I still can't wrap my mind around it. But the city's not different. There was a lieutenant. We had a floating brothel in the city when I was there. There was a group that was running a sex ring. They would go to bar to bar to bar after hours. Bars were closed. They'd bring prostitutes and the booze was there, obviously, it was a bar. And people would go and men would know that they were there that night. We couldn't catch them. And eventually one night, our public morals people catch them, our vice unit. They arrest everybody. Who was arrested along with them? An on-duty Baltimore City lieutenant. On duty, out of his district. He's the muscle for this organization. He's the gun protecting this floating whorehouse. I fired him, obviously. The two guys, this happened prior to them. The two guys I just mentioned to you who got fired for the car, they come in to defend him. I just turn them away. This is just, get out. That's ridiculous. I fire him. The council calls a public hearing. I was so up to my eyes with this nonsense at that point. He was a black commander. They made it racial. They bring me in that he was fired because he was black, and no, I fired him because he's corrupt and he was doing a bad thing, and you can't have him in a position of leadership in this department. So I did something very unexpected. I don't know if you'd like to do this, but I did it. They bring me in, and I'm there with my command staff, and the cameras are all there from the news stations. And one of the I think it was Jack Young, who was the head of the council at the time, maybe Sheila. They're asking me, um, we think you should bring Lieutenant Mack back. I'm sorry, I gave his name. Anyway, he's in the papers, so people know. I said, really? He says, yeah, we think you should bring him back. I was like, okay, I will. Now they're all like, what? Like you can see in their mind, like, we didn't expect that. I go, yeah, I'll bring him back tomorrow. Who wants him? Would you like him in your district? How about you? I'll put him back tomorrow. You want him in your district? Wherever you want him. Somebody raise your hand right now. I'll put him back in your district right now. Everyone starts shuffling their papers, looking at the desk. Culture sucks here. It's all about relationship. You could be the worst person on earth. They'll still come to bat for you to the detriment of the city. Really bothered me. And what I did was at that moment, after I did that and no one answered me, I took my hat, it was my dress shirt, took my hat, put it on, stood up, told my command staff, let's go. We're out of here. They're wasting my time. And we turned around and walked down in front of all the cameras. Um, that's what you do.
Of that. So I'm gonna ask you one more question, then I'm gonna open it to everybody else. I know a lot of your journey, let's say, you and I go way back, and between your policing and your radio and everything in between those two career paths, um, if you had the opportunity, because I know he gets floated often, bring Ed Norris back, Ed for mayor, Ed for commissioner, right, to this and that. If you had a way of fixing some of the problems that the city is facing with, what are some of the steps that you would take to change some of the current events?
I'd do exactly like
I do exactly like.
yeah, I would tell the truth. One of the biggest problems I think we have is, and one of my favorite quotes is from Napoleon Bonaparte. He said, leaders, the responsibility of a leader is to define reality before anything else. And that's what you don't get with our leadership now. Now, I'm not talking about the commissioner. I think we have a good commissioner now. I'm happy with what he's doing. I think the department's happier. Um, but our leadership in the city and the state, they talk as if everything's okay, and it's not. And they're lying. It's one of the most violent cities in the country. It still is, and it's not a good place. It's not a good place to live. It's not a good place to work. And you have to at least define reality and then decide how to fix it. And I would fix it through making it safer. And it's not safe. It doesn't even look safe. Think about it. Go downtown. Go to the Inner Harbor. Look at the Light and Pratt Street pavilions. No stores. That's a terrible look for a city. Go to East and West Baltimore. There's thousands of abandoned homes. Thousands. It's terrifying. And I guarantee most people haven't done this. If you drive through there in the middle of the night, it's dark, houses are abandoned, there's drug activity in these houses, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And then you see a lone person living in one of these blocks who's terrified. You got to fix this. These are the things I would do. And the first thing I would do is make the city safe. And I did this is what I did as commissioner. I gave a detailed plan. You have to have a plan. I said, this is where we are. This is where we stand in America. We're the most violent city in the country. This is what I'm going to do about it. Bang, 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 bang. Gave a list of things that we're going to do. And don't give them 20 things. Figure out 5 things that are really important you want to accomplish and accomplish them. That's what you do. Set realistic goals that are really important and do it. And that's what's not being done. It's all this nonsense about, we're doing this and this program and that program. Tell that to the mother of a kid who was shot in the face. It's like, I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about what you're really doing. Because if you don't make the city safe, nobody's coming. And they can, put all the lipstick on a pig they want. Think about this. After the riots in the city, the National Firefighters Associations, all the unions of the fire departments, they canceled their convention in Baltimore because it was dangerous. Firefighters run into burning buildings for a living, and they didn't want to come here. So what do you think you're going to do with the average business person when firemen don't want to come to the city? That's a problem.
I appreciate that, Ed, and I know that's honest because I've actually witnessed you do that in New York and in Baltimore when you were commissioner. So I appreciate that. So I'm going to open it to everybody here and maybe people online. Anybody has any questions for Ed? Go ahead, Kathy.
Going back to the incident with the taxi drivers, when the taxi drivers were released, when you have a manager or some type of supervisor, whatever, and it could be in any field of business, that you've been completely dismissed, blown off by, when you think you have valid, you've got valid critical information. When now 3 years later, and the towers are bombed, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, this information was for real. What was his response when you've got basically a toxic leader that now it's very much in the international public eye that you've been called out? Was there any response from him to that incident?
Yeah. No, the response was kind of what you'd expect, because he wasn't the only person that messed this up. He screwed up for sure by just shutting me down and telling me to shut up. But the feds really screwed this up the big time, more than any, because they were actually given the evidence and they never translated it to after the event of 93. They just didn't do it. So what they did was, because they screwed it up, they classified the information, which meant that I couldn't talk about it publicly or I could be prosecuted. So therefore, we stayed silent for about 10 years on this, because if you actually reveal stuff that is top secret or secret, you can be convicted of a federal crime. So that's what they did. They classified all the information surrounding that investigation to protect their own people. And finally was, and actually the commissioner of New York told the FBI director after a while, said, if you don't declassify this, we're going to reveal what happened anyway. So eventually they did, and I was able to talk about it, and I testified in front of Congress about it after 9/11.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, that Tyler, my lovely wife, is asking about your experience in a federal prison.
Oh, it was fun.
That's my wife. That's what she's into.
I'll tell you what, it's actually another lesson in leadership. It is. I mean it. I went in there terrified because, first of all, you should know by now, I was railroaded. The prosecutor was fired for framing me, and I wrote a book about it. And my big crime was, my father gave me $9,000 to buy a house in Baltimore. I didn't need it. I paid him back eventually. Um, but when they were investigating me, trying to make a name for themselves, they found that I wrote a check for $9,000 back to my father after he signed a gift letter to me, saying that the money was a gift for a home purchase. And the day I paid him back the money, it technically became a loan. So I lied on a mortgage application. That was my crime. I was indicted for that, but they made it seem like something else. And they sent me to prison. Um, the prosecutor was fired, so there was some consolation with how I got the job in radio. But my experience inside was I went in and I obviously I'm a police officer and I was in general population. They don't protect you at all. Everything, all the stuff you heard about prison is nonsense. Unless you've been in there, it's nonsense. There's no rehabilitation, there's no job training, there's no protection. You're on your own. But I learned quickly, if you act like an ass, you're gonna have a problem. If you follow the rules, and it's a subculture like any other, you follow the rules. I'm not saying all, but if you're a decent person and they respect you, you'll be all right, basically. Um, was I went in and made up a story and said I did something else, and somebody called me outside. He said, "Let me talk to you a second." He calls me outside from Maryland. He says, "Everybody knows who you are because we have TV in here." He says, "We know exactly who you are." So I was like, "Oh, all right." So I just told people, and then but I was just on. I just told people what happened and did my job. I worked in the kitchen and lifted weights every day and did what everybody else did. I wrote hundreds of letters and read 70 books in 6 months and just lived my life. Um, but the point is, there was one time that was very scary for me. I was only in the I was in Florida because I live in town. I was in a prison in Florida for a few weeks. We had a series of hurricanes. A big hurricane was bearing down on the prison. So they evacuated us. All they tell you is get your Bible or whatever your holy book is, um, and your shaving kit, get in the cafeteria. So we did, and that's it. They put us on prison buses and transport us to Yazoo City, Mississippi, to a maximum security prison that wasn't open yet. So we get there, and because I already established myself as a decent person and not a jerk, um, one of the biggest drug dealers in the prison took a liking to me because he was a decent guy. He just had different occupations. So we get to Yazoo, and they have no plan. They don't. This is an emergency. They have no plan. So they just sent us into this massive, prison with beds weren't even set up and nothing. It was just an empty cell. And they said, "Get somebody, get in the cell." So all right. So Tyrone Marks looks at me and goes, "You want to live with me?" I go, "Yes, I do." So I decided to jump in with Tyrone because I knew I'd be okay. Because if he thinks I'm okay, I will have no more problems. So I did. I lived with Tyrone in Yazoo. A couple months later, they decide, they find room for us in other places that for permanent housing. So we get back on those buses, drive through the South to Talladega, Alabama, and so on and so on. We get to Atlanta. Atlanta had a terrible reputation, terrible for being violent. That's where I was going. So I turned, there was 22 of us left from the original prison. So I turned to my friend sitting next to me. I said, I'm really scared. I said, "This is the first time I've been scared." I said, I may get hurt here. Um, he stands up on the bus. He tells the other guys who were remaining, he says, "Nobody gives up Eddie's profession." I was there for 3 more months in Atlanta, which was a terrible place. There were cuttings, there were fight. It was all kinds of stuff going on there. Um, Not one of these guys gave me up. Not one. In your eyes, people listening, they're all criminals. They're all felons. They were some of the most honorable people I ever met. Honestly, never said a word. The night before I'm getting out, the warden calls me. It was now the satellite trucks are outside Atlanta Penitentiary, and now everybody knows something's going on. It's me. So the warden goes, I'm put you up in the hill again, and he wants to put me in a hole. I go, I don't know. Because the last night your friends throw you a party. Sounds ridiculous. They go to commissary, they make you a meal, you see everybody you're friendly with, they say goodbye. You give whatever possessions to who, you have a watch, a shaving kit, whatever you have, you give it to your friends. And I said, I don't want to go up there. He said, you're going for your own protection. I said, you didn't give a damn about my protection since I've been here. Now you're worried? You going? So I walked down to where I was, and the correction officers come to get me. And I said, I don't want to go. I know these guys now. I said, I don't want to go up there. So you don't want to go? He said, no. I said, all right. He said, we like the wire. You can stay. Because I was on the wire, they remembered me and they let me stay. But the funniest part was I lived with the craziest person in the prison. I mean that. He was the guy that stole everything, could get anything. He's out of his mind. I never saw his eyes. He wore sunglasses, a do-rag, and three baseball caps every day at the same time. Never saw his eyes. And then he finally comes up to me, and I'll just be candid. There's a big buzz in the camp about who I am. He comes up and he goes, "Man, who the fuck are you?" So I just had to tell him. I just said, "You're not gonna believe this, but you've been living with a police commissioner Baltimore, the colonel of the state police in Maryland." Thought it was very funny. It's like, um, but my point is, it doesn't matter if you're at the top or the bottom. Your behavior matters. It really does. Your character matters. And that was my prison experience though. It was like it was crazy, but I learned a lot. I really did. And I sent Tyrone money after I got out. I sent to his commissary every month.
Honor and relationships go a long, long way, no matter who you are, right? Love it. I know Dennis is online. I asked his hand raised. So, Dennis, can you unmute yourself and ask a question, but without your Russian accent, though?
Well, it's Michael. My dad's here.
All right, perfect. So, Michael, you're allowed to speak.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Ed, who obviously now you're in sports media and you have all that career in public service. You've seen, I'm sure, on ESPN and other platforms, there's been instances of some sports media or just non-political media in general get political and people talking about stuff that doesn't necessarily have to do with what they usually talk about, and like Stephen A. Smith and just other people, and there's people on both sides of the political spectrum that like talking about politics and sports and mixing that, and that don't like it. And I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts because you were on both sides. You were, obviously on the police side and on the public service side, and now you're on the media side where you have a show where it's a little, with it's a very wide range of characters that you I was just kind of wanted your take on about that.
Can I add something actually before Ed answers?
Yeah.
Because if I remember correctly, Ed, your radio talk show actually was not a sports talk show at the beginning. It was current events.
Yes.
And it was kind of thrown or thrusted upon you to make it a sports radio.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
all right.
But to answer your question, I don't have a problem with people who want to give opinions politically because everyone's entitled to an opinion. The problem I have is when they lie. Because you can have an opinion, but I always feel your opinion has to have some basis in fact. And there's so many people give opinions without actually any substance, and that bothers me. Be they sportscasters or singers or actors, and they'll say things without any factual background. I don't mind. You can have your opinion about the police or the president or the government or whoever, but have some substance to it and have some fact base, have some experience in the realm. Like I hear things about because what happens is then misinformation gets spread and is disseminated throughout the country and it causes all kinds of division and polarization. And I think the best example was like when we had the riots after, Freddie Gray and George Floyd and things like that, where, I would read things and hear people say things that were just so, and Colin Kaepernick, you don't like the police, that's fine, it's your prerogative. but don't say things that aren't true. Um, you know, unarmed people aren't being murdered in this country. There's more white people killed by the police than black people. And the fact is, in police involved shootings, almost all of them are absolutely justifiable. 100%. There's very, very few that are not. And they made it seem like the police was, I saw one that there were 800, young black men slaughtered. It's not true. It was just not true. You just make it up. And that's where I get offended with people who just, they think they're doing the right thing, and I don't think they do. Or they just say things because they have a platform, um, and that does bother me a lot because you can have an opinion, but learn. Read a book, research a topic. If you're informed and educated, you can give all the opinions you want. You can be different than mine, but let's debate it. Just don't say things that aren't true because it's dangerous, and that really bothers me, especially now with social media, and even worse with artificial intelligence, because they can actually have people say things that really aren't true who look like they're in power. So it's a scary time.
Thank you.
You-
Thank you, Ed. Anybody else? Any questions for Ed? Ed, I appreciate your time. I know you're still healing. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll owe you a drink, and I have something for you when you're in Baltimore next time.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't be there.
Sorry,
I couldn't be down here this long.
That's okay. We've all been drinking, just not with you.
So
I guess we have been drinking with you. All right, then. Well, I appreciate you being on the call. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
See you when I'm back, brother.
All right, I'll talk to you later.